Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday and Happy New Year. Okay, I'm going to actually piggyback on what Greg was talking about. Greg was talking about kind of a strategic vision. I'm going to refer to a specific news article that I read in the paper this weekend. So, this came out of an analyst named Alexander Wise out of JP Morgan Chase. Now, JP Morgan is the largest bank in America, so I don't necessarily trust everything they say, but I do pay attention to it. So this analyst was talking about the threat of the Chinese yuan or renminbi to the US dollar. And his position is that the yuan is going to replace the dollar in terms of global use. Now, he didn't give a time frame, but he did talk about that it's kind of an inevitable process. Now, we all know that currencies don't last forever, and they just trade hands. Well, he did talk about the BRICS group, and we've talked about that before, how the BRICS nations have been pushing to de-dollarize global trade, right? And using their own currencies in the dollar's place. Then he talked about how the Chinese can push several measures to make the Chinese yuan more attractive. One, it could boost liquidity. It could also relax capital. So it just basically get the currency flowing more easily on a global scale. Now, the only way it would be picked up in use is if it becomes more attractive. So then here's where I come in. This is Walt talking here, not the analyst. But I was looking at we have problems here stateside, specifically moral hazard. So if you go back several years, we've seen a lack of respect for the US dollar growing and growing over the last several years. It started out with corporate bailouts. You had companies that were too big to fail. And so unlike the average Joe, you and me, if we get in trouble, we don't get bailed out, right? But if a big corporation gets in trouble, oh, don't worry, you don't have to take responsibility for your dumb mistakes. The U.S. government's going to dump a bunch of cash in and bail out your problems. Then the executives get richer and nobody has to suffer. Meanwhile, the average Joe on on Main Street is working their tail off trying to stay ahead of their debt payments because they respect debt and all that, right? So there's a conflict growing in terms of the haves and have-nots and the privileged and the corrupt and the powerful. Then we're seeing this even on a Main Street level now, where we talked about student loan payments coming back last October, and yet we found out that up to 40% of those borrowers aren't paying back their student loans. I mean, that's huge, right? Well, what about the neighbor of that person with the student loan who never took out a student loan in the first place and says, well, why are they able to borrow all this money and not have to pay it back? I never took out student loans. Oh, wait a minute. I took out credit card debt. Well, if they're not going to pay back their student loans, why should I pay back my credit card debt, right? Then, in the Albuquerque Journal this weekend, and some of you may have read the same thing, there was a medical doctor, a physician, who was arrested at Target on the west side for shoplifting. Now, this wasn't like a sad, down-on-your-luck story of a Jean Valjean who's got to steal bread just to feed their starving sister. This is a physician who makes plenty of money, who doesn't respect the system, doesn't respect the laws, doesn't respect the value of things, and just wanted to get away with something. And so we see our own citizens not respecting the dollar and not paying debt, and no consequences coming from that. So then why would the countries around the world respect our currency? And if that respect starts to decline, meanwhile, if it's easier to get their hands on Chinese yuan and it's respected, that may speed up the shift right there. Now, am I saying let's pack up our bags and move to China? Absolutely not. We live in the greatest country on earth. That being said, be careful with the currency. As it stands now, we know it's not going to last forever, and so that's why as your financial advisors, we are investing in hard assets, in real assets that are tangible, that you can touch, that have stood the test of time, and will continue to do so. So with that, I'll say have a great week, and we'll see you next week.